Oh, there we go.
Okay. And we are live. Hi, everybody. This is Steve Sabludowski, publisher of BayouBuzz.com. Today, this afternoon, we're going to be talking Louisiana politics, legislative session with my friend Lamar White Jr. Lamar has been with us before. He's the publisher, am I correct, of the Bayou Brief.
That's correct.
Not to be confused with Bayou Buzz. Bayou Brief. And also, are you doing San Lamar?
Nope. I retired that jersey.
Okay.
No more Lamar. Yes.
Okay. So, we're right now streaming this on various Facebook pages. My timeline, Louisiana politics, I believe on your page also.
That's right.
And on Periscope, Twitter, and YouTube. And so those people who are watching, look, if you have a question, go ahead and post your question. If you have a comment, again, we're going to be talking about Louisiana legislature, both the past session and the upcoming session. So feel free to go ahead and to post your question and or comment, and we will read those and discuss them. So let's get on with it. How have you been doing?
I've been great. How about you, Stephen?
I'm doing fine, thank you, thank you. So why don't you quickly just tell us about the Bayou Brief?
Well, we've been around for about 10 months now. It's sort of hard to believe. And we're a nonprofit, online-only news organization that covers the entire state of Louisiana. About a month ago, we brought on Sue Lincoln, who a lot of folks may recognize that name. She was a longtime reporter for WRKF in Baton Rouge. She did the segment Capital Access. And so we have an on-the-ground daily Capital correspondent. And I guess that the next 3 or 4 months, depending on how long this lasts, we're going to be focused pretty extensively on the legislative session, the upcoming regular session, and then the announced, I guess, second extraordinary session.
Sure, sure. Yeah, Sue's really terrific. So yeah, that's great. She'll be doing audio, or
she will be. Okay. Actually, sort of the first time I've announced this. She's going to be doing a podcast for us called Briefly Speaking with Sue Lincoln. And she's actually working on putting together the very first installment. I think that should be available sometime within the next few days. We will be also streaming on 96.9. It's a community radio station in Baton Rouge, and we're looking for other partners that would like to take her podcast and put it on the radio.
Oh, how about that? How about that?
Yeah.
Okay, well, that sounds really exciting. Definitely have to talk to her during the session to get an idea as to how things are going. So right now I'm putting this up on Bayou Buzz, and we're live on that also. So we just got finished with what I consider to be somewhat of a failure of a special session, a fiscal session. We're falling off the cliff. Some people say, some people have said we're inching towards falling off. So what's your take on it?
Well, I agree with Dr. Melissa Flournoy. She wrote an op-ed today in The Advocate saying that that the Speaker, Taylor Barra, should resign. I think that this last session sort of proved a failure of leadership in the Republican Party. And there are enough votes among Republicans, moderate Republicans, and Democrats to get us off of this precipice. What we saw in the last session was just an embarrassment and a failure of leadership. So I don't think we're going to arrive at any solution unless the Republican Party changes its leadership and we start changing some of the committee assignments.
Really, that's amazing that that she actually said that or wrote that, I should say.
Yeah.
Now, I think the Republican Party disagrees in terms of who to blame.
Well, I'm actually not as convinced by that. I think that there are a number of Republicans, and a lot of them off the record, of course, who would agree with that assessment. And we saw in the last session several different Republican legislators come up to the into the well and speak about the failure of their own party to compromise. Barry Ivey being one of them,
Right,
Kenny Havard,
right.
Rob Shadwin. There are several Republican legislators who are furious about the lack of compromise and really the lack of good faith among their leadership.
Well, as I understand it, and I'm just playing devil's advocate here, that they did not anticipate the Black Caucus to make certain demands, and that just kind of soured it from the standpoint of some of the Republicans that I've talked to.
Well, I mean, the demands that the legislative Black Caucus were making were entirely reasonable, actually. The Republican Party, the leadership there, had attempted to attach poison pill amendments to a lot of these fiscal bills that really weren't germane, that were probably eventually would have been struck down anyway. That essentially were about Medicaid work requirements, scrutinizing 455,000 Louisianians who are on Medicaid. And I think that their demands, if you will, were reasonable. I'm not sure, however, with the GOP leadership's line that the governor and his staff were not anticipating this. I think that's probably a false narrative. I'm pretty sure that the governor and people like Ted James and others in the legislative Black Caucus work hand in glove. And this was not something that really should not have been a surprise to Republican legislators.
Okay, now I'm going to play a video as I just discussed it with you. This is comments from the governor. It'll take about 30 seconds or so.
Okay.
You've heard it before, or you were there. You heard it a couple days ago.
Right.
So let's make sure that it's working. Let me see. Doesn't seem like it wants to work for me now.
It looks like it is, but it's on the screen.
Okay, but it is, let's see, trying to get it to play. Bear with me. Let me try one more time. I'll have to go back and try that again. Not sure why it didn't work. Okay, well, so anyway, basically what he said was, as you know, and I'm just going to paraphrase. I mean, you could tell. I mean, he just really blamed the speaker. I mean,
Right.
there's no question about it. He basically what he said was that they had a deal that that the speaker was supposed to bring, I think, a certain amount of legislators from the House
Yeah.
to approve the legislation, and they did not.
Right. I
So
think that the promise was that he could deliver 40 Republican votes.
yeah,
There's about
that's
60 or 59 actually right now in the House. Yeah, and it does seem like they had a deal from the very beginning that within hours of structuring this deal, it appears as if the speaker, walked back or took back his own word, which is really unfortunate. And we spent $900,000 in taxpayer money on this last session and didn't arrive really at anything.
okay. Do you think things will change in terms of possibly? I'm just throwing it out to you. Possibly they learned from this and that they're going to learn how to work together better. I know this is going on the third year.
Stephen, I really think that the only way this will change is if the Republican Party changes its leadership. I think that there are moderate Republicans in the House. There are a significant number of them. A lot of them have not spoken out for, I guess, fear of reprisal among their own leaders. But there are enough to ensure that this could be passed, that we can fix the budget. I don't see this happening unless they change their leadership, though.
Interesting, interesting. Um, do you really think that they'll do so?
Yeah, actually, I do.
Really?
I think all it takes is 53 votes to change the speaker. Any member of the legislature at any time can invoke Rule 2.4 and call for a voice vote to remove the speaker. I think this could be a real possibility, maybe the first day of the regular session. I know that some says my connection's unstable. I hope that we can still power through this.
Sure, we're
Um,
fine.
I think that, there are some Republicans already that are putting together, uh, I don't want to say a coup because it's not really a coup, but a vision of what the Republican leadership could look like under different control or different hands, rather.
Okay, so Brian Angel says advocate calling for Speaker Barra's resignation.
Right.
Republican Speaker Barra is in can't lead, won't, and that the Speaker is the chairman of the Moon Griffin uh, caucus, all from Brian Angel.
Hey, Brian.
So
Uh,
your response. And by the way,
I,
anybody else have a comment or a question or whatever, please go ahead. Brian, please share it share the video so we get more feedback from people. So go ahead. Go ahead.
well, I think he's referring to the same article I was referring to. I'm not sure if the editorial board of the Advocate has actually called for Speaker Barra to resign. That was a letter published by Melissa Flournoy in today's paper. And I'm not. I don't know about the Moon Griffon caucus as much as what we're seeing right now is the residue of people like David Vitter and Steve Scalise, sort of Washington-style politics that's taken over, and it really infected the ability to compromise and to come to solutions. This has been sort of a long time coming. Really, you can trace it all the way back to Vitter's decision to really champion term limits in order to, you know, basically take control of the state houses. So, I think that a lot of folks that know Barra well say that he's a very nice man. We saw, for example, I mentioned this in an article recently, Representative Ted James, who's a Democrat, a member of the Legislative Black Caucus, joking about how Barra wasn't really the effective speaker. It was Cameron Henry. And I think that there is a large number of folks that believe that the real power is sort of behind the scenes, that there's a lot of strings being pulled by people like Cameron Henry and Lance Harris, and that Barra is sort of, for lack of a better term, a puppet of theirs.
Okay, now it was a fiscal session, so obviously, the person, I mean, Henry would certainly be the key man for the Republicans, one of the key men in the House.
Right. Yeah. The chairman of the House Ways and Means
Sure,
Committee.
sure. Did an interview yesterday with Tyler Bridges. We did that on Facebook Live. And he threw out the possibility that there won't be a budget next session.
You meaning that?
That
Well,
yeah,
the
go.
regular session is not a fiscal session.
No, but they still have to come up with they're supposed to come up with the budget.
Right. Right. And I would agree that there's just no way they can come up with a budget. There's going to be probably best case scenario a $600 million shortfall. So the notion that they can somehow find $600 million, what's really critical for people to understand is, the Republican conservatives and people like the Americans for Prosperity group have been saying we've got this huge budget, $26 billion budget. We're really only looking at about $3.5 billion, right?
Right.
That you can actually cut from. And of that $3.5 billion or so, 80% of that money is for higher education and healthcare. So $600 million in cuts is quite significant. It's a quite significant portion of that discretionary money. And there's really nothing left to cut, unfortunately. Or this has just sort of been going on since the Jindal years. He cut our way into insolvency. So I agree with Tyler. I don't think there's any conceivable way that they can come up with a working budget in this regular session. And they're going to have to go to a second extraordinary session.
Which raises a question. I mean, the thing is that, and this is what Tyler had sort of poked at, and that is that will the fiscal hawks agree to just having a bare bones budget, cutting all the way the 600 million or $1 billion, or I mean, because they're saying we need to cut. Well, here's an opportunity for them to actually do that.
I just think they've really cut as much as they possibly can. I know that some folks have been talking about just eliminating tops, just or significantly reducing tops, including a number of these fiscal hawks. They think that tops is a waste of money. I push back on that. I think it can be improved, but even if we were to completely eliminate tops, we're still not even close to being there as far as our fiscal cliff is concerned. So I don't see any real solution there. There's just not enough money there.
Okay. Now, the budget in the last 2 years has actually increased, though, by
Right.
about 2 billion. Am I correct?
Yeah, and a lot of that is probably due or is due to Medicaid expansion funding, and budgets grow over time because our economy grows over time. So I think it's a talking point a lot of folks have used, but it's really kind of creates a false impression of what's really going on in the state.
But is the budget increasing more than inflation?
I don't believe so. I think that I don't believe so. No. In fact, I saw a graph about this today, which I can post in the comments after we're wrapped up.
Okay, great, great, great. So then it gets down to, okay, whether or not the state is getting its bang for the buck in terms of Medicaid expansion for the investment they're putting in.
It certainly looks like we are. There's significant data to suggest that we're making a return on our investment there. We've got 450,000 more people that now have health insurance as a result. Lives are literally being saved, and because of the decision, which by the way was supported by all three major Republicans running against John Bel Edwards in 2015, we've been able to collect additional revenue. So I think it's been a win-win for the state. But a lot of folks just don't like the idea of government subsidized healthcare. It's just a philosophical difference.
Gotcha. Okay, so I'm going to try to put up a tweet right now. Bear with me. Yeah, okay, so I know that you can't see it unless you're looking at your Facebook page.
Yeah.
Um, it's a tweet from J.R. Ball, and
Okay.
he says, glad to know Louisiana government is running so smoothly. This is 26 minutes ago, by the way.
Okay.
So smoothly and efficiently that those Baton Rouge legislators have time to entangle themselves in local political matters, and refers to a business report, second bill taking aim at Breck plan for Louisiana. Do you know anything about that?
I don't really. I mean, I know that there's a big debate in Baton Rouge over the zoo. I'm assuming that's part of what he's referring to, although I haven't really looked at it. But yeah, I mean, it's there. There are a number of sort of ridiculous bills that were pre-filed for the next session, and there were a number of ridiculous bills that were filed in the last session. It does make you question the seriousness of purpose of a lot of these legislators.
Any idea in terms of what might be the hot button issues this session, since it is a regular session?
I think that there's going to be a lot of debate on guns in the next session. We've seen about 15 to 20 different bills already filed about gun control, school safety. I just saw Senator Mike Walsworth, one of the sort of more strange bills, pre-filed a bill that would allow students to wear bulletproof backpacks. That's where we are in America, and it's sort of sad. And then Katrina Jackson filed a bill that would allow people to conceal carry a weapon at a parade.
Oh, really?
Yeah, provided they went through some sort of tactical training. Right now, it's against the law to carry a concealed weapon during a parade, which makes sense. So I think, and she's a Democrat.
Hmm.
So I think that there will be significant debate about gun sensibility, gun control. Helena Moreno has filed legislation to ban assault weapons. There have been a couple of different bills about increasing the age to 21 in order to purchase a weapon. And the NRA is very influential here in Louisiana. So the debate will be very interesting. The gun control here does poll well, even among gun owners. Background checks poll well. Assault weapons ban polls well. But again, the lobby is pretty strong here.
So here's a bill, actually a tweet from Kevin Fry. Is it Fry or Frey? But anyway, let's see. Carter Representative Carter filed a bill requiring the polls to be open on Sundays during the early voting period. What do you think of that?
Say that one more time. You kind of broke up there.
Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, so Kevin Fry or
Right.
Frey
Right.
said that Representative Carter filed a bill requiring the polls to be open on Sundays during the early voting period.
Right. I think that's the more opportunity we give people to vote, the better. And so I would completely endorse that.
So we can bus people from church to the polls.
Sure, why not? No, really, why not? I mean, what's wrong with busing people to exercise their right to vote?
I'm just recalling, as you recall, I'm recalling that purple bus or that bus in the last election.
Yeah, that was David Vitters, right? No, that was John Bell's Purple Party bus.
Right.
I don't know if they were taking anyone to vote, but that was
No,
sure it was a fun
no, they
story.
actually were, I think, to vote. It was a party they had, and they took them to
Right.
vote.
Well, it
Uh,
should voting should be a party. People should celebrate their right to vote.
and then party after after
Right.
they win, right? So let's see. Let me just see. Check Facebook for a second. Um, Thank you for sharing. I appreciate it. Those people watching, please go ahead and share. Um, and by the way, how is it going on your page?
It's going well. I actually have a couple of comments. My buddy Neil asked about Medicaid, and he asked if there's any movements during the opioid crisis.
Yeah, good question.
And I understand that there was an announcement recently, and let me see if I can find it. There may have been one today. That John Bel Edwards and Attorney General Jeff Landry have joined forces on this, a rare sign of compromise and bipartisanship there, to take over this. There was also a lawsuit. This is really interesting. That was filed in, I think, St. Tammany Parish this week, and it's a lawsuit against about 20 different opioid manufacturers.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's a really interesting lawsuit. And a lot of legal analysts think that this has a pretty good chance of going through. Right now, a lot of these cases are resolved in multi-district litigation, and so this lawsuit attempts to say that actually this should be a state court issue in Louisiana, which would give them a significant advantage on going after these companies. So we'll see what happens there.
Just out of curiosity, well, that is interesting. That is interesting. And so, did you say that there was legislation pre-filed?
I actually have not looked about any
Okay.
pre-filed legislation on opioids, but I know that it's a major priority all across the country, and here in the state of Louisiana, where we suffer sort of disproportionately from the opioid crisis.
So that actually raises a question in terms of the similarities, if any, with the tobacco.
Hmm. Yeah, I think one of the lawyers that's actually involved in this lawsuit that was covered, I think it was covered by Huffington Post earlier this week, was one of the lawyers in the tobacco settlement. We have some really talented and successful trial attorneys in the state of Louisiana who know their stuff. And yes, people have are already making comparisons between those two, and between also that and oil and gas legislation, right?
Which
Or
raises,
excuse me,
yeah, which,
litigation rather.
which raises another question, and that is that obviously, if the different um, individuals or suing, if they're allowed to sue, if they have a cause of action, what about the state of Louisiana?
I mean, it's a public health issue, and I think that we probably do have a cause of action. Now,
Well, with the
this,
attorney general, that's the really, I was suggesting that. I mean,
yeah,
would that be something the attorney general would get behind?
it sounds like it is. It sounds like this is one of those issues that is something that both parties on both extremes can agree about. So I think we will see some action on this. I don't know whether or not anything in the regular session would be able to tackle this. I think we're really going to have to look at litigation to get some of these issues resolved.
Unless there's some objection, like what happened with the oil companies and
Right.
preemptive action. One other thing, in terms of those kind of lawsuits, I would imagine, I'm just throwing it out, just thinking out loud since you brought it up, third party actions against doctors. I think doctors probably would want to preempt any third party action against them in state court.
Yeah, I would think so. There is. I read this lawsuit that was filed this week. There's a lot of data and findings that suggest a lot of these doctors, the overwhelming majority of these doctors, were purposely misled by the pharmaceutical companies. Now, what is interesting, and you may be onto something here, pharma, PHRMA, big pharma,
Sure.
the lobby, they have donated more to Louisiana legislators than to any other state in the entire country.
Well, Billy Tozan was ahead of
Yeah.
it for a while.
Right, Billy Tozan. I think he's still on their board, or if he's not, yeah, he was definitely the CEO or the head of it for a long time. So we'll see. And it's bipart. They've donated to both parties. They've donated to the Republican Party of Louisiana and the Democratic Party of
Sure.
Louisiana. So yeah, we'll see if they're able to, have any influence over the legislators or legislature during this session, if there's anything that's pending. But I would think that given the fact that other cases have been resolved in New York State and other places, this is something that I don't think anybody really wants to defend.
Let's take another question from John. Another question. This one again on your page, John Edward is a Maryland.
Hmm.
Why can we not have a competent taxing system in Louisiana? The purpose of taxes is to steer the economy successfully.
We have, I agree with the folks that say we need another constitutional convention. I don't know if the timing right now, given the makeup of the legislature, would be ideal. In other words, I'm a liberal Democrat, right? So I think that the folks that right now are in control, the fiscal hawks, would complicate things as far as getting a fair tax structure. But we spend hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars a year on exemptions to big companies, corporations. It's just, yeah, it's just a shame that we don't have one. But I will tell you this: last year, or it could have been 2 years ago, actually, there's this thing called the Committee of 100, right? And it's a statewide organization of business leaders,
Right.
and they had meetings all across the state about how to reform our tax code, and there was some bipartisan consensus about what to do. That was, in many ways, I think, overshadowed by the lobbying efforts of the Louisiana Association of Business and Industry, which has really turned into a partisan lobbying organization and not a trade organization or trade association as it was conceived to be. So it's crowded out. They've essentially crowded out a lot of ideas that have broad bipartisan support. And remember, they also take lobby. They have the scorecard every session that and regular and special sessions, where they will say, if you vote this way on certain pieces of legislation, 80% of the time, it's like maybe 20 votes they score each session. If you vote in favor of their agenda 80% of the time, you are automatically assured a donation from their PACs. And this is just this is a bad way that I think actually it could be a Hatch Act violation. Is it Hobbs or Hatch? But it's either way. Either way, it does look like legalized bribery. And until we resolve the influence of this partisan lobbying organization, we're going to be stuck where we are right now.
And of course, they would argue that, the trial attorneys are putting their money individually into different PACs, Gumbo PAC, etc. And so,
Yeah,
I understand the distinction that you're making, though.
yeah, Gumbo
Yeah,
PAC, or these attorneys who have paid. You're right. They have spent a lot of money, I think, on righteous causes, but they don't score. They don't do a scorecard. They don't hold legislators hostage with, the promise of donations to their campaigns if they vote a certain way. What's happening right now is that if 80% of the time, if you vote in favor of lobby's agenda, you're guaranteed money, and for a lot of these folks, that's enough to compromise their votes, and we've seen it happen.
Okay, so actually, let me throw some out to you. Stephen Wagaspack, we just put his column up on Bayou Buzz today, and he's in favor. It looks like he's in favor, uh, of a constitutional convention. He's saying, look, we got good people, both Republicans, Democrats, on all sides of the issue. The problem is our hands really are tied because we don't have enough space, given the fact that we have all these exclusions, exemptions. We talked about the lawsuit, tobacco, money going to schools, etc. Maybe other lawsuits, dedicated money, dedicated funds, to protect certain people and causes. Um, and Jim Brown also wrote a column that's also up on BayouBuzz.com today. I actually did the headline. It was, "Do we have the Constitution to change Louisiana?" So he's also in favor of a constitutional convention. He actually was a delegate during the
Right.
convention,
Right.
and I believe he argued in favor of letting the legislators make the decision about what to exempt, what not to exempt, because rather than just have the blanket saying you can't do it, you just never know what the exigency circumstances might be.
Well, I mean, I understand that. Right now though, it's just inarguable that we have way too many exemptions for way too many niche industries. Anybody that can hire a lobbyist, it seems like they can get a massive tax exemption. We saw that in the last special session where, there was a debate about, I forgot exactly what bill it was. Actually, there was a couple of them that were very heated, where there was an exemption carved out for the timber industry that would save them $4.5 million a year, and another exemption for oil and gas, quote unquote, mom and pop oil and gas companies, which let's be honest, don't really exist in the state of Louisiana. So at some point, I think that they had, even if they had passed this particular piece of legislation, which was expected to give back about $120 million, they had exempted about 95 million of that just through these amendments. So, you know, that's the other end of the argument here, which is, if you let legislators control each and every exemption, this is what happens. Every pet project, every friend that's in any industry, or preferred industry, will get a tax break. Can I say this, Stephen, too? It reminds me of this. There's a huge argument. Well, actually, it wasn't even an argument. It passed overwhelmingly, but about Louisiana Checkbook, this new website that they want to put up. And, one of the things that they don't want to be on this website, which is about government transparency and showing what the government spends its money on, they don't want to include exemptions. They don't want to include that. And the reason that is because this would really highlight how much money we give away to companies that are turning a substantial profit. And this is bad for business for lobbying. They've been championing government transparency when it comes to education spending or healthcare spending, but not when it comes to the billions of dollars we give away to their members. I think that's a problem.
There was a question on Facebook about tops.
Right.
I know that I know that you had talked about it a little bit. What's your opinion about tops? And actually, I know that you said that you think it's a bad idea to cut. So let me just throw it out this way. Jeff Carrere, I do a radio show with him every Tuesday morning, and he threw out an idea saying that basically to increase the standards to 20, I think a 2.5 average, from a 2 to 2.5 or 2.5 to 3, whatever it may be. Your thoughts?
I think that's a terrible idea. I think what needs to happen is that TOPS needs to be more focused on needs-based and not any, for example, the kids, two kids of a guy in my hometown who's probably worth close to $1 billion, both receive TOPS scholarships. Does that make any sense? And
No,
and he'll admit this, but we know that something on the magnitude of 40% of TOPS recipients come from families that make over $100,000 a year. These are families that should be able to, or are able to afford tuition at a public institution. If we also need to look at reducing the cost of tuition at LSU and other schools. That should be part of it. But yeah, I think that the original vision of TOPS
Sure.
was about needs-based scholarships for children who otherwise would not have the opportunity to go to college. And with all due respect to Jeff Crouere, his solution seems to disincentivize college education, really providing people that have the access and means to take an ACT preparatory class, for example, or who go to certain schools that have more resources. That allows them an advantage, and that's not the purpose of TOPS.
Sure. No, I actually, as you know, Taylor, where TOPS gets its initial T. I mean,
Right.
it was for those people in inner city who really would not have an opportunity to go, but they excelled. And I think what Jeff was getting at, because I don't want to misquote him, but I think what he was saying is once they're in university, that if they don't maintain a certain average, and that could be weighted. So if you go into the university at a certain level, maybe you have to maintain a certain level. The whole point is that why should we continue paying? And I think this is what he's saying. Why should we continue paying for somebody's education if they're going to be playing around? And why should we wait? Why should we pay for it?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I think that there are ways for colleges and universities to reprimand people, students who don't perform well, without taking away the resources that they have to go to school in the first place. So I don't know if that's really the existential issue with TOPS. I think that the problem right now with TOPS is that we give far too much money away to the children who belong to families who otherwise should be able to afford it, can afford it. And it's sort of like you mentioned about Patrick Taylor and Phyllis Taylor. It's sort of lost the original purpose. It's grown beyond the scope of its original purpose. There are other ways, like there are other reforms we can do to ensure merit-based admission into public universities, like what Texas does, for example, where if you graduate within the top 10% of your high school, you're automatically accepted into the state's premier institute of higher education. In their case, it's UT Austin. In our case, it's LSU. So we could do that without jeopardizing merit-based admission. But I don't know if it's appropriate to make TOPS to give TOPS away to the sons and daughters of people who are mega millionaires, or even people who are in the upper middle class.
So I just put up another tweet. I think this one is really kind of interesting. It's from Kelby Daigle,
Mm-hmm.
7 minutes ago. If Representative Ralph Abraham, runs for Louisiana governor, he will run on a limited constitutional convention. I don't know if that's an opinion, or if he has.
Sounds like he knows something we don't.
Or he has inside information. But it seems like the Constitutional Convention is gaining some mileage because people are frustrated. They're saying, we can't be limited. We can't just put everything on TOPS and healthcare.
I mean, what's really frustrating to me is that we know how to solve what's in front of us right now. There are common sense solutions to the budget crisis right now. And instead of addressing what we should be addressing right now, these folks, like presumably Representative Abraham, are attempting to blame some structural problems, which do exist. But let's focus on what we can resolve right now. And I don't know if Kelby I believe he's a political consultant who's worked with Republican candidates in the past. So
Okay.
he may know something about what Representative Abraham is planning on doing.
Okay, so we'll have to reach out to him
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah. Changing gears for a second, it's my understanding that, and actually I think it's related. We're 2 years away from the governor's race, roughly, less than that. around October of this year is pretty much where the candidates are really going to have to start cranking up.
Yeah.
The eye is on, I think, Senator John Kennedy in terms of what he is going to do, what he may do. Um, what kind of role do you think that he will play?
Are you asking about Kennedy? Is that what you just
John
asked?
Kennedy, yeah,
Yeah.
Senator John Kennedy. What
You
kind of role
know,
do you think he'll play during the session?
well, I mean, he's already been trolling the session, sort of ignorantly trolling the session. I actually am not. I agree with Stephanie Grace. She had a column out today. I actually don't know if he's really going to run for governor, although the speculation right now seems to be that he will. I think he just enjoys, getting at the governor right now, John Bel Edwards, that is, criticizing him. But I also understand that a lot of folks who contributed to John Kennedy's Senate race only 2 years ago, a lot of major donors are frustrated by the fact that he is presumably or seemingly now saying he wants to run for another office. And the whole point of giving to Kennedy in the first place was for him to establish some seniority that our delegation lacks.
Right.
So he may have a more difficult time than he anticipates raising money for a state race only 2.5 years after asking for significant donations. I mean, there's a limited universe of people in Louisiana that are capable of donating the types of money that you need to be competitive in a statewide election. For lack, unfortunately, that's just the case.
Well, he probably has some money left over, as you
He
remember.
does. He does.
He
He
used
does.
his state campaign money to contribute to a PAC who contributed to his Senate PAC, just like Vitter did, but the reverse.
Right. Which, in the wake of Citizens United, people are just sort of getting away with things that you'd never imagined that they would be able to get away with before. But you're right. He does have, I think, about $500,000, maybe a little bit less than that, in his state coffers. But remember, that's about 10% of what John Bel Edwards has right now.
Right.
So he would really need to ramp up fundraising almost immediately.
And one other thing, Edwards has anywhere from, in terms of what Bernie Pincenet's polled him at, 63%. I saw another poll the other day, 58% popularity. Kennedy, being a Republican, is under 50%.
It's interesting. There was a study by 538 yesterday about the swing of Democratic voters in special elections, and we see in Louisiana there's 15.5% shift toward Democratic candidates in the last three special elections. Now, I don't believe any of those Democratic candidates actually won,
Yeah.
but we are seeing a resurgence of it's really all across the country. It's probably the Trump effect in a way.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. So, is there anything in particular that I haven't asked? I know that you got to go. Is there anything in particular that I haven't asked that you would want to just bring up or to ask yourself, for that matter?
Well, I would just say I want to encourage people to go to legis.la.gov, legis.la.gov, and go through the bills that have been filed for this regular session. You can search by the author. You can search by keyword. If you're interested in guns, actually the keyword you need to use is weapons. If you're interested in abortion policy, there's a couple of bills that are coming up that really should make some headlines and become more informed. That's what we're lacking right now. I think that the last session really proved that lobbyists and people that have a vested financial interest in the outcome of certain legislation were able to dominate the media landscape and really manipulate what happened. What happened in the last session was really anybody objective that looked at it, that watched every meeting, which I did. It's just hard not to take away that the Republican leadership in the House is what really failed. And I said this on Twitter about, I guess, maybe a few hours after the session ended. The notion that we should blame 4 African American Democrats for the failure of dozens and dozens of white legislators strikes me as absurd and tinged with a little bit of racism. So I think we should be honest about who's really holding our state back right now. And it's not it's not due to our Constitution. That needs to be fixed. But it really isn't due to our Constitution. It's due to the fact that we've been infected by hyper partisanship. We've been infected by DC style politics. And just a few years ago, there was a sense of camaraderie and congeniality that unfortunately doesn't really exist anymore. And, I guess the last thing I would say is, in my hometown, I live in New Orleans, but my hometown is Alexandria. And, our the state rep of the home that my mother still owns there, and I stay in all the time, is represented by Lance Harris, who's the head of the Republican caucus and a majorly influential person on this part of the party, this caucus of no. People like him, I would just say to the people in my hometown and people who are represented by partisans like Lance, to go look at their record and see what they've done to represent your community. There's been a lot of posturing, a lot of theater. I don't see a lot of results, in Alexandria. I don't see that he ever sponsored any legislation that promoted our region, that, brought money back home, that resolved an issue that we had. And I think the same could be said about a lot of these guys, that they're really not in this to represent their constituents back home. Their constituents are partisan, ideologues.
Well, but like Bernie Pin, I did an interview, video interview with Bernie Pinson a couple weeks ago, and basically what Bernie said was, based on the poll, people do not want any money to be raised, any taxes, unless of course the other guy pays. But they're under strict instructions: don't raise taxes, and so they're obligated, to follow the voters who put them into office.
I mean, I understand that taxes don't poll well, and I don't mean to be dismissive about Bernie's, conclusions, but it's bigger than that. This is the result of, we've been through this. Grover Norquist held our state hostage during the Jindal administration because of this ridiculous no new taxes pledge, or not even no new taxes, no tax renewals. We've seen tax renewals fail in Shreveport and in Lafayette that have really been devastating to local projects. It's time for us to wise up. And what's ridiculous about the last session in particular, right, is Democrats, Walt Leger, had a bill that would eliminate the ability for people to double deduct on their state and federal income tax, the same deduction twice. We're one of only 4 states that allows it. It's a really stupid loophole. We put it in place under the Jindal administration. Actually, it was, when voters approved Stelly, it was part of Stelly that you couldn't double deduct. That was something that was approved by the majority of the people of Louisiana and undone by the governor and the legislature. So clearly the people of Louisiana support this, or did at least. This would have raised $79 million a year. Republicans basically said, but first we want to pass a law that reduces exemptions on sales tax for food and medicine and other things.
Right.
So in other words, they're okay if they're okay with exemptions on sales tax, or eliminating exemptions on sales taxes, which are retrograde, sure. They're regressive, but they're not okay with eliminating a loophole that we have that only affects people in the upper middle class and the wealthy. Their priorities are out of whack, and I understand, taxes don't poll well, but if people really understood what these guys were prioritizing, I think they would be really upset, and including the constituents of folks like in House District 26, Lance represents.
I gotta tell you, I've got a feeling that they're just following marching orders. That's what they believe. They know. I mean, that's where their voters. That's where their constituents are coming from, and whether it hurts them or not, the big thing is taxes. It's the boogeyman, or it is the Frankenstein, however you want to frame it, but it's just
Look, I mean, you may be right. I just know that the district that Lance holds right now, for example, was held by a Democrat previously, and a lot of these districts that are now controlled by Republican ideologues recently were controlled by Democrats. I think that people in general are more moderate than they're given credit for in Louisiana. I mean, and I think that after however many years it's been, 10 years of this, I think people are wising up. And I hope that they pay more attention to the upcoming session. They read the legislation that's been pre-filed and make particular note of what is being pre-filed by their own state representative. And hold them more accountable. That's really what we need.
well. Let me just close my comments by saying this: that I remember in the conversation I had with Bernie, I think, and the number may have been like 80% of the people, the registered voters, did not want that their taxes raised at all. Even African Americans did not want an increase in tax. But the question wasn't framed like, are you willing to trade tops for taxes? And to me, that's a fair way to find out, are you willing to give something up that you really want by paying more tax?
And guess what?
Paying a certain amount in tax. Yeah.
And there is a poll that was recently conducted by Anzalone that asked questions exactly like that. And when you frame it to voters, in an informed way, you find that the overwhelming majority of voters will say, no, we don't want to give up tops. We don't want to give up funding for higher education or healthcare. And yes, we're willing to have a tax increase, certain tax increases, right, or certain revenue measures. 70-80% of voters will say this. So it does really depend on the way you frame the question. I totally agree with that. And I think most people are more moderate than we give them credit for.
I'd be surprised. Not the people I know, not the people who, I don't know if you remember Louisiana politics group, certainly not people of that group. No taxes, absolutely no taxes for most of the people, in my opinion. So hold on one second. Listen, those people are watching. Please go ahead and share the video. We really appreciate it, or like it. That means that we can get out there more. Please go to Bayou Brief. I know that you're really investing a lot of your effort and time. Statewide, not-for-profit website, Bayou Brief. And if you could hold on one second, I'm going to turn some buttons off. And again, please. Oh, by the way, tomorrow at 8 o'clock in the morning, we have your counterpart, Rob Manis. Rob actually, he's a really interesting guy. We've had him on the last 2 Fridays. He's going to be on every Friday morning. He actually took on President Trump on guns last week, and was really very, very angry. And said that it's time to impeach if that's his red button, his single issue, or his major issue. So we'll see what he's
ask him if he knows which Russians came to Louisiana in 2014. Just throwing that out there. Just maybe ask him if they have any relation to the pact that he put together.
Okay, well,
I don't know if it's true. I've just heard it. So
okay, I didn't hear it at all. So
yeah.
Okay, well, listen, I'm gonna hold on. I'm gonna press a button,